I want to close the door. No, I want to close the door. I'm not releasing train news unless I get to close the door. It's cruel and all, but I still want to close the door. Alright, you. Welcome to train news. Our introductory story is of course that the Class 800 has now entered service on Great Western Railway. While Virgin called their 800s Azumas, people aren't really sure what to call Great Western's units. Many mistakenly call them IEPs, which is silly because IEP is the programme under which they are introduced. Hitachi knows them as AT300s or SET Super Express trains, so take your pick. The introduction of these units was followed by their immediate withdrawal due to major technical issues, such as leaking air conditioning. Oh dear. The Class 707 Desiro City has now entered service on South Western Railway, although as we know they are soon to be withdrawn and replaced. As for many of the usable fleets being displaced across the UK network, we don't really know who's going to take them. The Class 399 CityLink tram-train vehicles have now entered service on the Sheffield Supertram. The actual extension to Rotherham is supposed to open next year. Yeah, and train news is coming every month. The 2nd of September was the Old Oak Common Depot Open Day, marking 111 years since the opening of the depot, which is now set to close. As part of the Open Day there was a lineup of the legends of Great Western, including Class 800 number 003, named Queen Victoria/Queen Elizabeth II. I mean, there are plenty of 800s to go round, why do they have to share? The mainline half of the new Abbey Wood station, which will be the southeastern terminus of the Elizabeth line, has now opened. Crossrail Elizabeth line services are set to begin in December 2018. The Ordsall Chord is set to open on the 10th of December, allowing for direct services between Victoria and Piccadilly stations in Manchester for the very first time, in theory. Neither franchise is actually ready for the opening of the Chord, with TPE set to move its services next May and Northern Connect not launching until 2019. The only service to actually use the new Chord initially will be a token extension of the Bradford to Manchester Victoria service through to Manchester Oxford Road. Bit disappointing. The big changes are to come in May 2018, so there's that to look forward to. Also in December, electrification of the Bolton-Chorley-Preston line is set to be complete, when we will see the first electric trains through to Preston via Bolton, probably Class 319 units. The line to Blackpool North is set to be closed from the 11th of November until March next year as part of electrification works, which will be complete in May. Perhaps TransPennine Express are hesitant to put trains on the Chord, therefore pushing more trains through platforms 13 and 14 at Piccadilly. Because somebody decided that we don't need more platforms. Meaning that platforms 13 and 14 have now become even more of a performance liability. So most of the trains through the Chord will be late anyway. That's ridiculous, that's like building a train with half wheels. You might as well have made the Chord single track. London Midland is set to be replaced with a new West Midlands franchise operated by a consortium of Abellio, JR East and Mitsui this December, and they've been busy. Despite having a relatively modern fleet, they've decided to buy 107 new trains, a mix of Aventry units and CAF DMUs. Part of the purpose of these trains is to replace the Class 323 units. On the other hand, the franchise has confirmed that they will not be replacing any of their 350s and that they will also be taking on the 350s from TransPennine Express in 2019, as well as the 172s from London Midland after the Goblin electrification is finally complete. So it seems like my Adopt a Train campaign kinda works. However, that still leaves no space for the Class 323 units, which are now being withdrawn from both Northern and London Midland. With the current trend of franchises opting to buy a ton of new trains because they're cheap, the prospect of the Class 323s now going to scrap is suddenly very real, which I think would be a terrible waste. Despite their somewhat unpleasant interiors, the Class 323s are actually very good trains with impressive acceleration and gradient management. In South and East Manchester, ahead of the CAF units, the trains will initially be replaced with Class 319 units, despite them having rubbish acceleration and gradient management. Now on my line, the Style Airport line, that's not such a big problem because it's a relatively straight and flat line and the distance between the stations is large enough for the train to get up to its maximum speed, which is 100 miles per hour, thereby making up for its poor acceleration. On the Hadfield-Glossop line, however, that is an entirely different story, and the introduction of trains with slower acceleration and poorer gradient management will no doubt make the service slower. Both 3 and 4 car Northern units in Manchester fill up during peak times, so getting rid of the 323s for the sake of it seems stupid. Since nobody else actually wants them, I don't see why Northern can't keep them and run the two fleets side by side, maybe couple 323s up to make 6-car trains. Why are we letting relatively new trains sit and rot in silage, ultimately destined for scrap, when they're perfectly capable of being used to provide much needed short-term capacity? Anyway, proposals have been put forward to create a new West London orbital line, using the currently freight-only Dudding Hill line between Cricklewood and Old Oak Common/Willesden Junction. If the scheme goes ahead, the line will most likely be incorporated into the London Overground network. As mentioned previously, TransPennine Express have begun their Class 185 interior refurbishment. Our correspondent David Frankel has more.
The next stop will be Manchester-Oxford Road.
Virgin Trains have started to re-livery their Class 390s, essentially splodging an Azuma livery onto the front with no consideration for the train's shape or form, whilst leaving the rest blank. What an improvement! Not so live from Manchester Piccadilly, our correspondent David Frankel has more. So after a couple of weeks of waiting, I've finally had a good opportunity to come take a look at the new Pendolino livery Virgin Trains have put on the Class 390s. There are actually 2 of them, both in new livery. One of them has since left. So yeah, I think it looks terrible. I hate it. I mean, I like the red swirl on an Azuma because the livery was designed for an Azuma, which this is not. It's a Pendolino. And the way they've tried to weirdly retrospectively add that livery on, you know, totally contradicts what the head of the Virgin Trains liveries was talking about in terms of finding a livery that suits the train's shape.
Ray has this big idea that and I have too, really, that the livery should work with the architecture of the vehicle. So it's not just about whacking colours on the side, it's actually about looking at the shapes and styles and corners and cuts.
Which this doesn't, because it's literally just the livery of an Azuma plastered onto the Pendolino. The problem is that the Azuma as a train is much more has much sharper edges, whereas the Pendolino is very rounded, and for that reason it doesn't really look good, and the shape of the front warning panel looks very weird and unnatural, and I don't like it. And that's just the front. As for the rest of the train, there is no livery. They've literally just painted it white, like it's just come out of the factory, or it's a poor imitation of some the Japanese Shinkansen trains. I mean, it's so boring. There's nothing there. Obviously, this was not entirely down to Virgin, as with many things. Whenever you have a complaint to a rail company, it's probably true that at least 40% of that complaint would be better aimed at the DFT, who specified that the livery should be plain, because Virgin might lose the franchise. So if they win, they might go back and add the ribbon to the rest of the train. But it still doesn't look good, because it's an Azuma livery on a Pendolino, and as one clever YouTube commenter pointed out on a video on the topic from a couple of months ago, that it will likely come to be known as the Pretend Azuma, a nod to the Pretendolino, which was a Mark III set design with a livery that was designed to make it look like a Pendolino. Only this one is less loved by rare enthusiasts and more hated for being a terrible livery. So, no, I do not approve. Should paint them back again. Notice how here yellow is part of the livery of the train and it follows the curve of the front, whereas here the warning panel, it looks a lot more kind of like there because it has to be and not there because of the livery. And yeah, it's not, it has no respect to the shape of the train, in my opinion. Siemens and Alstom have now confirmed that they are set to merge in order to better compete with Chinese and Japanese manufacturers such as CRRC and Hitachi. The move will bring together the manufacturers of the Pendolino, TGV and Velaro sets all under one roof. And that brings us nicely to our final topic of the day. And no, it's not the rant about tickets, I'll do that at some point, but that's not important. No, today I want to talk about the ongoing driver door operation crisis, which is only growing in size. Since the last episode of Train News, there have been strikes on the 3rd and 5th of October, and at the time of filming there is another one due on Wednesday the 8th of November. This strike will be the second to include Greater Anglia and the first to include South Western Railway, meaning this crisis has now spread to 5 franchises. Now any human with at least 4.5 brain cells will notice a clear pattern here. Essentially, company orders a bunch of new trains, RMT declares strikes. That is, unless the company immediately concedes like Great Western Railway and ScotRail did. Southern is the only franchise that has actually actively introduced driver door operation, with strikes against the other 4 companies being entirely preemptive. For South Western Railway, it's gotten to a point where the RMT can suspect that a company is maybe, possibly, thinking about maybe changing the role of the guard. And that is essentially enough for the RMT to declare all-out war. I mean, it's downright paranoia at this point. It is easy to forget, however, that the main reason these franchises can't go out and say, no, we won't change the role of the guards, is because of Department for Transport specifications. In fact, you may find that a lot of the grievances that passengers have with train operating companies, driver door operation, strikes, cancellations due to poor infrastructure, boring liveries, would better be directed at the Department for Transport. which is behind the scenes pulling all the strings. Hence why nationalisation would not solve all our problems. Drivers' union ASLEF and Southern have reached a possible deal to end their dispute, which includes a 28% pay rise for drivers over a certain number of years. The decision is being put to a referendum amongst the drivers, with the results due to be announced on the 8th of November. Personally, I don't think they'll vote for it. The other main union involved in this dispute, the RMT, were furious at this and are continuing their dispute. Now, you will have probably guessed that I'm not a huge fan of the unions and their strategies. A strike is essentially a way to attempt to weaponise passengers against a TOC, since strikes have little to no effect on the company's actual profit, especially on Southern, which is a non-franchise management contract. Meaning the only people who really suffer from a strike are the passengers. Now, in the past I've said that Northern and Merseyrail should give in to the unions, and I stand by that, not because I agree with the unions, but because I think that's the fastest way to end the dispute, and I think passengers should be put first. But I don't think the RMT are entirely innocent here. The core of their argument about the safety implications of drivers closing the doors instead of guards is disingenuous at best and absolutely ludicrous at worst. Especially on Northern, where trains are very rarely more than 4 carriages long. In fact, what I believe the main motive for the unions here is job security, as turning guards into onboard supervisors implies that they can then be removed more easily. As this sinister extract from the proposed deal between ASLEF and Southern Rail shows. Agreed reasons to run without OBS, late notification of OBS sickness, emergency leave or absence, OBS displaced by service disruption, OBS unable to continue duty on booked diagram. Now this raises a number of interesting questions bordering on philosophical. Let's say you have major service disruption and overcrowding at a major station, just another day for Southern. Your train to Uckfield or some other place is about to depart, but you realise that your OBS is running late due to another delayed train. Let's say waiting for this train are 200 able-bodied passengers and 2 wheelchair users. Your 2 options are to A. run the train and leave the 2 wheelchair users behind, or B. cancel the service for everybody who will have to wait for the next train in, say, an hour. Now obviously in an ideal world this scenario would never happen, but in an ideal world I wouldn't be talking about this dispute anyway. Now to clarify, personally I am deeply against the implication that a disabled passenger should have to book 24 hours in advance to travel by train. Given that their disability makes transport difficult enough, trains become even more essential for disabled people to get around, as opposed to someone like me who could just hop in a car or a taxi or on a bike. No matter where you may stand on unions or conductors, we should all agree that turn-up-and-go access for everybody has to be a priority on today's network. What the unions won't tell you is that there are plenty of other viable ways to achieve turn-up-and-go access for disabled people than necessarily having to have a second member of staff on every service to put the detrainment ramp down. But instead of having a discussion about this, neither side are willing to compromise, leaving no middle ground. The irony of RMT strike action is that Southern have already pushed through driver door operation, meaning that they can and regularly do operate without an OBS at all. Which is why nowadays you'll see that when the RMT declares strike action, the number of Southern services that are run actually don't change. As opposed to say Northern, where they have to actually cut 60% of their services. One criticism the RMT had of Greater Anglia after last October's strikes was that with little safety protocol or training, GA decided to just run the entire day without any guards. Therefore, the lack of guards and OBS on services was now caused directly by RMT strikes. And while I do believe that the safety implications of driver door operation can be mitigated with the correct training, having drivers with no training or protocol just give DDO a try for the day is downright dangerous and irresponsible of Greater Anglia. But doesn't the RMT also see how they are partially responsible for that? And for God's sake, can we just admit that there are perfectly viable ways to achieve DOO without safety or accessibility implications? Believe it or not, it is possible. Let's look at the Manchester Metrolink. Now, train and tram operation are obviously very different, and it's not a one-to-one comparison. Nevertheless, I think there are certain practices that Metrolink has, which I think the heavy rail industry, especially Southern Rail, could learn from. Number 1 is level boarding. Now, obviously the Metrolink has an advantage because it was built from scratch, with trams and platforms being all under the same company. However, Is it so hard to have trains that are vaguely the same height as platforms? Now, with us in the middle of replacing about a third of our national rail fleet, I'm probably suggesting this about 5 years too late. But surely before a major train order is made, could the company not specify a sensible train height? Most European countries have much lower platforms than us, and most of their new trains are almost tram height to compensate. Now, of course, it's not that simple because the stations on our network are made up of a jumbled mess ranging from 20 to over 150 years old. But even so, I think we can do better than this. It's a bit pathetic, isn't it? Another solution is to modify the platform heights, either by rebuilding platforms or just using built-in ramps or Harrington humps. Or you could have a ramp built into the train that could be activated remotely. Or heck, the driver could just get out and put the bloody ramp down. Another thing Metrolink does to compensate for the lack of a second member of onboard staff is by having easy communication with the driver with the use of these help panels, which can be activated in case of an onboard emergency. Once the tram has stopped, the driver can easily leave the cab to help with passengers. Now, of course, this doesn't work with double trams, but this is actually less of a problem for Southern, as their fleet is mostly made up of electrostarts with walk-through doors. And finally, to satisfy everybody who's complaining about getting your hand trapped in the doors, Metrolink doors are sensitive enough so that if you put anything in the way, they will immediately open again, stopping the tram from leaving. Now, I'm no expert, of course, but I'm sure that these things could be incorporated or partially incorporated into heavy rail operation with relative ease. In fact, I'm sure if the company and the union were to get together and brainstorm, they could think of something 10 times better than that. If they would only try. But they won't, because the union won't be happy with any solution it doesn't involve guards being on board and closing the doors. And rail companies would much rather run trains with no protocol and leave wheelchair users on platforms than actually engage with the union and talk about it. Now, I'm sure train companies will eventually pick up on the whole order a bunch of new trains, get the RMT knocking on your door pattern, but in the meantime, I have a fairly good guess as to who's probably going to be next on the list. Who is it that just ordered a bunch of adventurers again? Right, I'm done this month. That's the end of Train News. Train News 9. Thank you for watching. David Frankel Show 71 coming next week, and the next Train News will probably be in December or January or something, I don't know. Sixth form is hard, okay? En France, de nouvelles lignes à grande vitesse a été récemment ouverte pour relier Paris avec Bordeaux et Rennes. En même temps, la SNCF a décidé de changer l'image de TGV, qui s'appellera désormais Inouï.
Wait, where do you think you're going?
Oh, I was just leaving.
But we haven't agreed who gets our stuff.
Yeah, the camera's mine.
Yeah, like, what's your plan? Do you even have a plan?
My plan is to just leave but use your camera and have you all on my show but not have to do anything myself.